Try this for 7 days. Live without personal identity and watch what changes. There comes a moment in every life when the soul grows tired, not tired of living, but tired of trying to live, tired of managing, correcting, defending, becoming. And when that weariness appears, it is often misunderstood. We imagine it to be discouragement or failure, but it is neither. It is the holy signal that the soul is ready to rest from the burden it was never meant to carry. You have not come here because you are weak. You have come because something within you has begun to whisper that the weight you have been bearing is not required of you. The constant sense of, I must do, I must become, I must fix, I must protect, this has grown heavy, and the soul, in its wisdom, knows when it has carried enough. The scripture says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Notice carefully what is said. Not improvement, not reward, not answers. Rest. Rest from what? Rest from laboring under a sense of separation. Rest from the belief that life depends upon a personal self struggling to survive in a world it does not control. This is not an invitation to effort. It is an invitation to stillness. And stillness is not something you do, it is something you allow. The psalmist spoke of this when he wrote, "Be still and know that I am God." He did not say, think about God. He did not say, believe in God. He said, be still. For in stillness, knowing arises without effort. Now let us be clear from the beginning. What we are about to explore is not a challenge in self-discipline, nor a program of self-improvement. It is not about becoming better, more spiritual, more worthy, or more enlightened. It is about allowing something to fall away, something that has been assumed but never questioned. Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Why is it easy? Why is it light? Because it is not carried by a personal sense of I. The Christ does not strain. The Christ does not struggle. The Christ does not wake each morning asking, how will I manage this day? The burden only appears heavy when it is carried by a false sense of identity. And so, before we speak of 7 days, before we speak of any experiment, let us pause here, because this pause is the doorway. You are not being asked to do anything. You are being invited to notice what has already been done through you without you. The world teaches you that you are a person living a life. The Christ reveals that life is living itself as you. These are not two ways of describing the same thing. They are entirely different standpoints of consciousness. From one, there is fear, effort, and exhaustion. From the other, there is peace without cause and movement without strain. Moses stood before the burning bush and asked the most human of questions, "Who shall I say sent me?" And the answer that came was not a name, not a form, not a definition. It was simply, I am that I am. Not I will be, not I was. I am eternal, present, self-existing being. That same I am is not distant. It is the very awareness reading these words. Yet, for centuries, humanity has taken that divine name and fastened it to the personal self. We say, I am afraid, I am sick, I am lacking, I am unworthy. And without knowing it, we place the infinite name upon finite conditions. This is not sin. It is misunderstanding. And misunderstanding is not corrected by effort, but by recognition. The prophet Isaiah spoke for God, saying, I am God, and there is none else. He did not say, I am God somewhere. He said, I am. There is no other I. The Christ revealed by Jesus is not a second identity added to the human one. It is the uncovering of the only identity that has ever been. So we begin here not with instruction, but with listening, not with striving, but with yielding, not with the question, what must I do for the next 7 days? But with a far gentler inquiry. What if the one who thinks he must do something is not who I truly am? If you feel a quiet easing as you hear this, do not analyze it. That easing is not emotional comfort. It is recognition beginning to dawn. It is a soul remembering something ancient, something it has always known but long forgot. You are not late. You are not behind. You have not failed. You are simply ready. And so we rest here for a moment, not as an exercise, not as a technique, but as a natural return. Let the words fall away if they wish. Let the mind relax its grip. For the Christ does not enter where it is invited loudly. It is revealed where the heart becomes still enough to notice. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. That silence is not around you. It is within you. And it is from this silence that the journey we are about to explore truly begins. If we are to move gently and honestly into this exploration, we must first look not intellectually, not critically, but contemplatively at what we mean by the word personal, not to condemn it, not to analyze it, but simply to see it for what it is. For nothing can be released that has not first been recognized. The personal sense of self is not something you created. It was inherited. It arose quietly, innocently, as consciousness learned to navigate a world of form. It is the sense that says, I am the thinker of these thoughts. I am the doer of these actions. I am the carrier of these responsibilities. I am the one who must make life work. This sense is so familiar that it is rarely questioned, and yet it is this very assumption that Jesus came to dissolve. When the Master said, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. He was not rejecting goodness. He was pointing away from the personal sense that claims ownership of qualities that belong only to the divine. The personal self always wants to say, I am loving, I am patient, I am faithful. But the Christ reveals something far subtler. Love is expressing, patience is unfolding, faith is living itself, not owned, not managed, not possessed. The personal identity believes itself to be a center. It imagines that life flows outward from a private mind into the world. But Jesus reversed this view entirely when he said, I can of mine own self do nothing. This was not humility in the human sense. It was revelation. He was declaring that the personal self is not the source of life, intelligence, or action. He was revealing that the Father, the infinite, impersonal presence, is the only actor. Now listen carefully, because this must not be misunderstood. The personal sense is not an enemy. It is not something to fight, suppress, or destroy. The moment you try to get rid of it, you have already strengthened it, for only a person tries to eliminate a person. The Christ does not battle illusion. It sees through it. The personal self is simply a viewpoint, a lens through which life has been interpreted. And like all lenses, It can be set down when it is no longer needed. The Apostle Paul touched this truth when he wrote, "Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me." He did not say, "Christ helps me." He did not say, "Christ improves me." He said, "Not I." That is not annihilation. That is clarification. The personal sense lives in time. It remembers the past. It anticipates the future. It carries regret and fear as though they were possessions. But the Christ lives in now. The Christ says, "Before Abraham was, I am." Not I was, not I will be, I am. Eternal presence cannot be burdened by history, nor threatened by tomorrow. And here we begin to glimpse the quiet secret. Suffering does not arise because conditions exist, but because identity has been placed in the condition. Fear hurts because someone claims it. Lack disturbs because someone believes it belongs to them. Responsibility overwhelms because someone imagines they are the sole source of action. Remove the owner, and the burden dissolves not by magic, but by truth. This is why Jesus could sleep in a storm. This is why he could stand unmoved before accusation. This is why he could say, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth. The world gives peace to the person. The Christ is peace, and therefore cannot lose it." So, when we speak of living without personal identity, we are not speaking of becoming passive, indifferent, or detached from life. We are speaking of living from a different center, or more accurately, discovering that there has always been only one center, and it was never personal. The prophet said, "In him we live and move and have our being." Not beside him, not helped by him, in him. If this is true, and it is, then the personal sense has never been the doer. It has only believed itself to be, and this belief is not corrected by effort. It is corrected by seeing. When light enters a dark room, darkness does not struggle to leave. It simply is not there anymore. So too, when the Christ is recognized as the true identity, the personal sense gently recedes, not because it is pushed away, but because it is no longer needed. We are not rushing ahead. We are not laying out a system. We are simply allowing understanding to unfold at its own pace. For the Christ never moves hurriedly. It waits patiently until consciousness is ready to recognize what has always been true. And if, as you listen, you feel a subtle resistance, or a quiet curiosity, or even a faint relief, do not analyze that either. These are signs that something deeper than the mind is responding. The seed is not being planted, it is being remembered. Let us continue gently, then, into the next unveiling, not to add more knowledge, but to see more clearly what has been silently shaping your experience all along. There is a burden that most of humanity has carried so long that it is no longer felt as a burden at all. It has become familiar, habitual, almost invisible. And because it is invisible, it is rarely questioned. Yet it is this unseen weight that lies beneath much of what is called struggle, anxiety, and spiritual longing. The burden is not illness. It is not lack. It is not circumstance. The burden is the belief that there is a personal I responsible for life. From the earliest years, this sense is formed quietly. The child learns to say, "I must behave. I must succeed. I must protect myself. I must become something." And soon this must becomes the atmosphere of existence. Even our prayers reflect it. We pray, as though there were a small self here and a great God there, hoping that help will arrive in time. Yet the Christ reveals no such distance. Jesus said, "My Father worketh hitherto, and I work." Notice again the subtlety. He did not say, "I decide and the Father assists." He revealed a single action flowing from a single source. And yet the personal sense hears this and immediately translates it into self-effort. I must work harder, pray better, think more positively, live more spiritually. And the burden quietly increases. Even spiritual practices often reinforce this weight. We speak of my healing, my progress, my awakening, my path, and the personal self eagerly accepts these responsibilities, never realizing that it has taken upon itself what it was never meant to carry. The Christ does not awaken, it is awake. The Christ does not heal, it is wholeness itself. The Christ does not progress, it is complete. The scripture says, "Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee." But notice what happens. The personal sense casts a problem while retaining identity. It hands over the condition but keeps the burden of being the one who must be sustained. And so the burden remains only now spiritualized. Yet the Christ offers something far more radical. He does not offer to help the personal self carry the load. He reveals that the load was never yours. When Jesus said, "Take no thought for your life," he was not advising carelessness. He was unveiling a reality in which life is already being lived by a wisdom greater than personal thought. Look closely at your own experience. How much energy is spent managing outcomes, anticipating danger, rehearsing conversations, revisiting the past, planning for security. This is not life. This is vigilance. And vigilance is the activity of a self that believes it stands alone. The prophet Isaiah spoke for God, saying, "I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. Not I will advise thee how to straighten them. Not I will assist thee when thou hast done thy best. I will go before thee." This is not poetry. This is revelation. Life is not following you. You are following life. And here we begin to see the hidden cost of personal identity. It is not merely emotional fatigue. It is the constant sense of separation from the source of being. It is the belief that love must be earned, safety must be secured, peace must be achieved. It is the feeling of being a fragment in a vast and uncertain world. Jesus never lived from this sense. That is why he could say, "Which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature?" Thought, in the personal sense, adds nothing to being. It only obscures what is already present. The Christ does not improve life. It reveals life as it is. And so, the burden we never questioned begins to reveal itself not as something imposed upon us by fate or society, but as an assumption quietly accepted long ago. The assumption that I am a person who must manage life. Do not judge this assumption. Judgment strengthens what it condemns. Simply see it. For the moment it is seen, it begins to loosen its hold. And as it loosens, something unexpected occurs. There is space. There is breath. There is a subtle easing that has no outer cause. This is not relief because circumstances have changed. This is relief because identity has shifted even slightly. the soul begins to sense that it has been trying to live a life that was never meant to be lived personally. The psalmist wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He did not say, "I shall not want if I shepherd myself well." He revealed a state of being in which lack has no foothold because ownership has been relinquished. And so we stand here, not yet releasing the burden, but recognizing it. Recognition always precedes release. You cannot lay down what you do not know you are carrying. But once it is seen, the laying down happens naturally, without force. We are not rushing. We are not demanding change. We are allowing truth to do what truth always does. When it is recognized, it liberates. Let us continue then, gently, into the next unfolding, where time itself begins to lose its authority, and the sense of urgency that drives the personal self begins to dissolve. There is a tendency in the human mind to believe that truth must be reached gradually, that freedom lies somewhere ahead, that realization is the reward of long effort and faithful endurance. And so the personal sense is always looking forward. One day I will understand. One day I will arrive. One day I will be free. Yet the Christ knows nothing of one day. The Christ lives only as now. When Jesus said, "Now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation," he was not offering encouragement. He was stating a fact of being. Salvation is not an event in time. It is the recognition of what is eternally present. And because it is eternally present, it does not require time to become real. It requires only the yielding of the belief that something is missing. So why, then, do we speak of 7 days? Not because truth unfolds in a week, but because the human sense of identity loosens its grip when time is given a gentle boundary. The personal self is comfortable with endless effort. It is less comfortable with simple experiments. 7 days is not a demand. It is an invitation. The personal sense does not resist. In Scripture, 7 is never merely a number. It is a symbol of completeness, not completeness achieved, but completeness revealed. Creation, we are told, was finished in 7 days. Yet God did not become complete on the 7th day. God rested, and in that rest, creation was seen as finished. The work ceased, not because it was done by effort, but because it was recognized as already whole. This is the pattern we are touching here. Not striving toward wholeness, but resting in it long enough for the illusion of incompleteness to fade. The Christ does not evolve. The Christ does not mature. The Christ does not require development. It is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What changes is not the Christ, but our awareness of it. The human mind believes that if it does not hold tightly to time, something will be lost. Yet it is time itself that keeps the personal self in bondage. Time says, "You were damaged. You must repair. You may fail again. You are not there yet." The Christ says only, "I am." Jesus never postponed truth. He never said, "Later you will be free." He said, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Not will make you free, but shall. Freedom is not delayed. It is immediate when truth is recognized. 7 days, then, is not a schedule. It is a soft doorway. It is a way of saying to the personal sense, let us pause our lifelong project of becoming, just for a little while, not forever, not heroically, just enough to see what happens when the burden of time is set down. During these days, nothing is being built, nothing is being achieved, nothing is being accumulated. The Christ is not strengthened by duration, Silence does not deepen because of hours counted. Recognition is not impressed by calendars. And yet, something subtle occurs when the mind is told it need not carry the future for a short while. Anxiety begins to loosen. Urgency begins to soften. The constant inner voice that says, I must hurry, I must get this right, I must not waste time, begins to lose its authority. The prophet wrote, They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. But waiting, in the spiritual sense, is not passive endurance. It is the cessation of self-driven motion. It is the quiet standing aside that allows divine activity to be revealed. Strength is renewed not because effort continues, but because effort stops. 7 days is enough, because truth does not need proof. It needs exposure. When sunlight enters a room, it does not ask how long the darkness has been there. Darkness has no history in the presence of light. In the same way, the personal sense, no matter how long it has governed experience, has no power when the Christ is recognized, even briefly. And so we do not enter these days with expectation. Expectation belongs to time. We enter with openness. We are not watching the clock. We are not measuring progress. We are simply allowing the false sense of urgency to rest. This is not delay. This is not postponement. This is immediacy revealed through gentleness. For the Christ is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It becomes evident the moment resistance relaxes. If you feel even a faint sense of relief at the thought that nothing must be accomplished, that no future moment holds your freedom, then you are already touching the truth. That relief is not emotional comfort. It is the recognition that eternity does not hurry. Let us continue now, not by planning what must be done, but by uncovering what has always been quietly present beneath the effort to do anything at all. Now we come to the heart of what is being offered, not as a method, not as a discipline, but as a quiet turning of consciousness. It must be said gently, for the mind is quick to misunderstand this point. What is before us is not something to be practiced in the usual sense. It is something to be ceased. The personal sense is always asking, what must I do? What must I apply? What must I remember? And the moment that question arises, the burden subtly returns. For the Christ is never reached by effort. Jesus did not say, strive to enter in. He said, the kingdom of God is within you. That which is already within cannot be attained by movement toward it. It can only be revealed by stillness. The experiment, then, is not to become more aware, but to stop interfering with awareness. It is not to control thought, but to withdraw belief from the thinker. It is not to improve life, but to cease identifying with the one who believes life needs improvement. Jesus revealed this when he said, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. He did not praise them for their discipline. He did not instruct them to trust. He revealed a state of being in which trust is not practiced. It is natural, because there is no sense of separation from the source of supply. The personal self believes it must hold life together. It believes that if vigilance relaxes, chaos will enter. Yet this belief has never been tested. It has only been assumed. And what we are touching here is the gentle testing of that assumption, not by force, but by release. To release does not mean to suppress thought. Suppression is effort. It means to see thought arise without granting it identity. A thought appears, perhaps fearful, perhaps urgent. The personal sense immediately says, "This is my thought, and I must respond." But the Christ sees differently. The Christ sees thought as an appearance moving through consciousness, not as a command. Scripture tells us, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." It does not say, "Improve your mind." It does not say, "Discipline your thinking." It reveals that there is a mind already present, a divine consciousness that does not react, does not fear, does not plan for its own survival. So the central principle is this: when something arises, fear, desire, responsibility, judgment, you do not rush to deal with it. You do not deny it. You do not spiritualize it. You simply refrain from saying, "This is mine." This is the moment where identity loosens. The personal self lives by ownership. It survives by claiming, "My problem, my body, my future, my mistake, my responsibility." But the Christ claims nothing and therefore carries nothing. Jesus said, "Take therefore no thought for the morrow." Again, this is not advice, it is revelation. Thought for the morrow belongs to the belief in a future self that must be protected. The Christ lives as now, and now requires no defense. The experiment is not to stop thinking, but to stop believing that thinking is you. When thought arises, let it rise. When emotion appears, let it appear. But remain as the awareness in which these things come and go. This awareness does not comment, it does not judge, it does not act, and yet action flows naturally from it without strain. The Apostle Paul touched this when he wrote, "For it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure." Not God assists your will, but God worketh in you. The moment this is recognized, effort loses its necessity. This is why we say the experiment is not doing, but releasing. Doing belongs to the belief that something is missing. Releasing belongs to the recognition that nothing has ever been absent. The Christ is not summoned by words. It is revealed the moment striving ceases. If the mind asks, "Am I doing this right?" that question itself reveals the personal sense at work, and there is no need to correct it. Simply see it. The seeing is enough. The light does not fight the shadow. It reveals it. And so we are not preparing techniques for the coming days. We are preparing willingness. Willingness to pause, willingness to let go of ownership, willingness to discover that life has always been living itself without personal supervision. This is not passivity. It is trust without effort. It is faith without belief. It is rest without collapse. It is the still confidence that comes when identity is no longer lodged in the one who thinks he must manage existence. We are not finished. We are only deepening. For what follows is not instruction, but orientation, a way of being carried through the days without structure, without strain, without the need to succeed. Let us continue now into that unfolding where the days are no longer measured by tasks, but by a single, gentle inner stance. Now we arrive at what may seem, to the personal sense, the most unusual part of this entire journey. For here there are no steps to follow, no schedule to keep, no spiritual assignments to complete. There is no marking of progress, no checking of results, no measuring of success. And yet, this is not disorder. It is the highest form of order, the order that arises when life is allowed to live itself. The 7 days are not 7 different practices. They are not stages of ascent. They are not levels of attainment. They are simply 7 opportunities to remain in a single orientation of consciousness. And that orientation is this. Whenever something arises, you pause. You do not pause to analyze. You do not pause to correct. You do not pause to make something happen. You pause because the Christ does not react. Reaction belongs to the personal sense. Recognition belongs to the Christ. When fear appears, and it may, you do not ask why it has come. You do not attempt to overcome it. You pause. And in that pause, something quiet but powerful begins to assert itself. You begin to sense that the awareness of fear is untouched by fear. When lack appears, perhaps as worry, perhaps as comparison, perhaps as concern for the future, you do not rush to affirm abundance. You do not argue with the appearance. You pause. And in that pause, the eye that is aware of lack reveals itself as incapable of lacking. When responsibility presses in, when the mind says, I must handle this, I must decide this, I must carry this, you do not resist responsibility. You pause, and in that pause, you may begin to feel that something deeper is already moving, already unfolding, already acting without strain. Jesus lived entirely from this orientation. That is why he could say, the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. He did not say this after prayer. He did not say it after success. He said it as a statement of fact. It was his standpoint of being, and so during these days, you are not attempting to live differently. You are allowing yourself to notice that life has always been living you. The pause is not an interruption of activity. It is a withdrawal of false ownership. You may pause in the midst of conversation. You may pause while walking. You may pause while making decisions. The pause need not be visible. It is inward. It is the gentle refusal to immediately say, this is my problem, or this is my responsibility to solve. The prophet wrote, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Not do something, not figure it out, but stand still. For salvation is not achieved by motion. It is revealed when motion ceases to be driven by fear. These 7 days are not about maintaining continuous awareness. The personal sense cannot do that, and attempting it only strengthens it. Awareness is already continuous. What falls away is the belief that awareness must be maintained by effort. You may forget, you may react, you may become involved in thought and emotion. This does not undo anything. The Christ is not offended by human reactions. The moment you remember, you pause again. There is no failure here because there is no goal. Day 1 does not differ from day 7. The Christ does not gradually appear. It is either recognized or it is not. But recognition may flicker at first, brief, subtle, almost unnoticed. That is enough. A single moment of true recognition outweighs years of effort. Jesus compared the kingdom of God to leaven hidden in meal. It does not announce itself. It does not hurry. It works silently until the entire substance is changed. So too, this orientation works beneath the surface of consciousness, unnoticed by the personal sense, yet profoundly effective. And as these days pass, something curious may happen. You may begin to notice that pauses arise on their own, not because you remember to pause, but because something deeper remembers itself. This is not discipline. This is grace. You may also notice that life continues to function. Decisions are made, words are spoken, actions occur, and yet there is less strain, less urgency, less sense of personal pressure. This is the Christ revealing its nature not as withdrawal from life, but as effortless participation in it. The scripture says, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it." This is not condemnation. It is compassion. It is the unveiling of a simpler way of being, where life is not constructed by personal will, but revealed by divine intelligence. And so, these 7 days are not something you carry. They carry you. You are not watching yourself closely. You are not monitoring progress. You are simply allowing the habit of personal ownership to loosen its grip, one pause at a time. We will go deeper still, for as ownership loosens, language itself begins to change. The way the word I is felt begins to shift. And with that shift comes a profound unveiling of identity. Let us move now into this next recognition where the words, "This is not mine," need not even be spoken, because truth has begun to speak for itself. As the pause becomes more familiar, something subtle begins to occur. You may not notice it at first, for it does not announce itself. There is no moment when a voice declares, "Now you have released personal identity." Instead, there is a quiet lessening of ownership. Thoughts still appear. Emotions still move. Circumstances still unfold, but they no longer carry the same weight. They no longer feel so personal. This is the beginning of identity withdrawal, not withdrawal from life, but withdrawal from the belief that life belongs to a personal self. At first, the mind may try to cooperate by forming statements. "This is not mine. I give this to God. I release this." But these words, though sincere, are not yet the reality. They are attempts by the personal sense to manage its own disappearance. And the Christ does not disappear by being managed. The deeper release happens without language. It happens when awareness simply remains as awareness and ownership is not claimed. A thought arises, perhaps fearful. In the past, it would have been instantly adopted. My fear, my anxiety, my concern. Now, something different happens. The thought is seen, and because it is seen, it is not owned. Jesus revealed this distinction when he said, "Why take ye thought for raiment?" He did not deny that thought appears. He revealed that thought does not need to be taken. The taking is the act of personal identity. The not taking is the activity of the Christ. You begin to see that suffering does not come from thought or emotion themselves. It comes from the moment they are claimed as me. The Christ never says me to a condition. The Christ says only I am, and that I am remains untouched by what passes through consciousness. The psalmist wrote, "I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved." This does not mean that problems vanish. It means that identity has shifted from what is moving to that which is unmoved. When fear arises and no one claims it, it begins to dissolve, not because it is fought, but because fear cannot survive without a host. When lack appears and no one identifies with it, it loses its authority. It may still appear as a circumstance, but it no longer defines being. This is why Jesus could say, "In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." He did not overcome the world by changing circumstances. He overcame it by not identifying with it. The world can only trouble the one who believes he belongs to it. As this recognition deepens, language itself begins to soften. You may find that you no longer say, "I am angry," but simply notice anger passing. You may no longer say, "I am afraid," but see fear as a movement in consciousness. This is not suppression. Suppression is force. This is freedom. The Apostle Paul expressed this when he said, "I die daily." He was not speaking of physical death. He was speaking of the daily, gentle dying of personal ownership. The personal sense is not destroyed. It is outgrown. It loses its central position and becomes transparent. At this stage, the Christ begins to feel less like an idea and more like a presence. Not a presence you summon, but a presence that has always been there, quietly waiting for attention to shift. You begin to sense that awareness itself is stable, unmoving, unthreatened. It does not rush. It does not react. It does not defend. And because awareness is no longer entangled in what appears, action becomes simpler. Decisions arise without anxiety. Words come without rehearsal. Silence becomes comfortable. Life begins to feel less like a task and more like a flow. Jesus said, "He that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do also." This was not a promise of miracles. It was a revelation of identity. When the personal sense steps aside, the same consciousness that lived through Jesus lives through you, not as imitation, but as expression. You may notice that you are no longer asking, "What should I do?" Instead, something acts. This does not mean passivity. It means that action no longer carries the weight of self-importance. It is not my action. It is life unfolding. This is the meaning of saying, "This is not mine," without words. It is not denial. It is not avoidance. It is the recognition that nothing that appears has the authority to define what you are. And as this recognition stabilizes, something else begins to emerge, something quiet, unmistakable, and deeply reassuring. You begin to see that peace is not something you feel occasionally. It is something you are. Let us move now into this next unfolding where the effects of this recognition begin to show themselves naturally, without effort, without intention, without striving. As identity loosens its grip on the personal sense, changes begin to appear not as events, not as achievements, but as quiet evidences of a deeper order coming into view. These changes are often overlooked at first, because the personal mind expects drama. It looks for signs, results, proofs, but the Christ reveals itself gently, like dawn rather than lightning. One of the first things you may notice is a lessening of urgency. Situations that once demanded immediate reaction no longer press with the same intensity. The mind may still present its familiar messages. This must be handled now. This is serious. This cannot wait, but something deeper does not rush to obey. There is space where there once was compulsion. This is not indifference. It is discernment. The Christ does not hurry because eternity has no deadlines. Jesus moved deliberately, calmly, even when crowds pressed upon him, even when danger was near. He lived from a place where time did not rule. You may also notice that thoughts lose their sharpness. They still arise, but they do not pierce as deeply. Worry may appear, but it fades more quickly. Old patterns of self-criticism may surface, but they no longer seem authoritative. This is not because you are managing thought better, but because thought is no longer managing you. The prophet spoke of this when he said, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee." Peace does not come from the absence of thought, but from the mind resting in a deeper center than thought. Another sign is a subtle softening in your relationships. You may find yourself listening more and defending less. Reactivity loosens. The need to be right diminishes, not because you are practicing kindness, but because the personal self that needed validation is no longer at the center. The Christ has no need to protect an image. Jesus said, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." This was not a moral command. It was a description of consciousness. Judgment arises from separation. When separation dissolves, judgment has no foundation. You may also begin to notice moments of peace that have no explanation. No condition has changed. No problem has been solved. And yet there is calm. This peace does not announce itself as spiritual. It simply is. It arises because the false claimant of experience has stepped aside, and the true identity stands revealed. At times, the personal sense may become uneasy when these changes occur. It may whisper, "Something is wrong. You are not taking things seriously enough." But seriousness belongs to fear. The Christ is deeply attentive, yet utterly untroubled. The scripture says, "The peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds." Notice again, peace keeps you. You do not keep peace. When identity rests in the Christ, peace is not something you practice. It is something that guards consciousness naturally. You may also notice that effort begins to feel unnecessary in certain areas. Tasks are still performed, but without strain. Decisions arise without inner debate. Even challenges may appear less threatening, not because they have vanished, but because the one who once felt threatened is no longer in charge. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy with life, free of fear. The Christ does not stand apart from experience. It stands within it, untouched. It is important not to grasp at these signs. The personal sense will attempt to claim them. I am more peaceful now. I am progressing. The moment that happens, the burden tries to return. Simply let the signs be what they are, evidences, not goals. Jesus never told his disciples to look for signs within themselves. He pointed always to the Father within, knowing that when attention rests there, all else aligns naturally. These early changes are not the purpose of the journey. They are its fragrance. The purpose is not improvement of experience, but clarification of identity. And as identity continues to clarify, something deeper and more practical begins to unfold. For the Christ is not only peaceful, it is intelligent. It does not merely soothe, it guides. And as recognition stabilizes, you may begin to sense that life is not something you must navigate, but something that knows exactly how to move. Let us turn now to this next realization, where the Christ ceases to be an inward concept and begins to function as the living intelligence of your daily life. There comes a moment often unnoticed when the Christ ceases to be something you think about and begins to be something you live from. It does not arrive with announcement. It does not declare itself as realization. It simply begins to function, and this is how you know it is real. Up to this point, much of what we have touched may have felt inward, subtle, almost hidden. But the Christ is not an abstraction. It is not a mystical idea meant only for quiet moments. It is the living intelligence of being, and when it is recognized, it naturally expresses itself in the ordinary movements of life. Jesus never separated spirituality from practicality. He did not retreat from the world to preserve his peace. He walked among crowds, answered questions, faced conflict, traveled long distances, and yet remained unmoved. Why? Because he was not living as a person navigating circumstances. He was living as the Christ through which circumstances unfolded. He said, "The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." Notice again the simplicity. He did not say, "I pray before I speak." He did not say, "I try to listen carefully." He revealed a state of consciousness in which speech arises from a deeper source than personal thought. As the Christ becomes practical in your own experience, you may notice that decisions no longer feel burdensome. There is less inner debate, less weighing of options, less fear of making the wrong choice. This does not mean that choices disappear. It means that choice is no longer driven by anxiety. The Christ does not deliberate in fear. It knows, and this knowing is not intellectual. It is quiet, immediate, and certain without argument. You may find yourself acting without rehearsing, responding without planning, moving without strain. This is not recklessness. It is alignment. The prophet said, "I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye," not with pressure, not with urgency, with vision. Guidance does not shout. It reveals. At this stage, prayer begins to change. You may find that you are no longer asking for answers. You are no longer pleading for direction. You are resting in a listening that has no words. And in that listening, life arranges itself. Jesus demonstrated this repeatedly. When faced with hunger, he did not worry about supply. When faced with illness, he did not struggle to heal. When faced with hostility, he did not defend himself. He stood in the awareness that the Christ is not reactive, and because it is not reactive, it is effective. You may notice that problems no longer dominate your inner space. They still appear as situations, but they do not occupy consciousness. They do not demand attention. They do not insist on personal effort. And often, though not always immediately, they resolve themselves in ways the personal mind could never have planned. This is not because you have learned a better strategy. It is because strategy has given way to intelligence. The Christ is not clever. It is wise. It does not manipulate outcomes. It allows harmony to reveal itself. The Apostle Paul spoke of this when he said, "I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." This was not resignation, it was mastery, not over circumstances, but over identity. Contentment arises when identity rests in what is unchanging. As the Christ becomes practical, you may also notice a new simplicity in your desires. You want less, yet feel more fulfilled. You chase less, yet receive more. Not because you are denying desire, but because desire has returned to its source. The Christ lacks nothing, and therefore does not seek. This is the point at which the spiritual life ceases to feel like a separate activity. There is no longer spiritual time and ordinary time. There is only life, lived from a different center. Washing dishes, speaking with a friend, facing a challenge, none of these pull you away from the Christ. They are expressions of it. Jesus said, "My meat is to do the will of him that sent me." This was not obedience to an external command. It was nourishment. When life is lived from the Christ, action itself becomes sustaining. This is not something you force. It is something you notice after it has already begun. The personal sense steps back, not because it has been disciplined, but because it has been outgrown. And in that stepping back, something infinitely capable steps forward. Yet even here, there is more to be uncovered. For as the Christ becomes practical, it also reveals something startling. Problems themselves begin to lose their voice, not because they vanish instantly, but because they no longer speak to anyone who believes they must respond. Let us move now into this next unveiling where the authority of problems dissolves and experience is no longer ruled by what once seemed powerful. There is a discovery that comes quietly, almost unexpectedly, as identity rests more deeply in the Christ awareness. It is not announced with excitement, nor does it present itself as victory. You simply begin to notice that problems no longer speak with the authority they once held. They may still appear, but they do not command attention. They no longer dictate the state of consciousness. This is not because problems have disappeared. It is because their audience has changed. A problem has power only when it is speaking to a personal sense of self, one who believes it must respond, resolve, defend, or correct. The moment that personal sense loosens, the problem loses its voice. It may still exist as a circumstance, but it can no longer define identity. Jesus revealed this when he said, "In the world ye shall have tribulation." He did not deny the appearance of difficulty, but he continued, "Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Notice carefully. He did not say the world would be removed. He said it would be overcome. And the overcoming did not occur through force, but through transcendence of identification. The personal sense lives under the authority of appearance. It believes that what is seen, felt, or reported must be obeyed. The Christ lives under the authority of being. It knows that appearance has no creative power. Appearance can report, but it cannot rule. This is why fear loses its grip when identity shifts. Fear speaks loudly, but it has no substance of its own. It requires belief to survive. When fear arises, and no one says, "This is my fear," it begins to dissolve. It is like a voice echoing in an empty room. The psalmist wrote, "Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear." This was not optimism, it was identity speaking. Fear cannot occupy a heart that does not belong to the personal self. The same is true of lack. Lack appears powerful only to the one who believes supply must come from outside. But Jesus said, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." The kingdom is not added to you. It is revealed as you, and what is revealed cannot be withheld. As this recognition deepens, you may notice that problems no longer demand constant mental engagement. You are no longer rehearsing them, explaining them, justifying them, or defending against them. They may arise, but they pass more quickly. They do not linger because they are not being fed. The Apostle Paul spoke of this when he said, "We look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen." He did not mean denial of appearance. He meant that identity no longer rests there. Consciousness has found a deeper anchor. This does not mean that you become careless. On the contrary, action becomes clearer and more effective. When a problem does require response, that response arises without panic, without mental noise, without the weight of personal responsibility. It is done, and then it is released. The Christ does not carry yesterday's problem into today. It does not anticipate tomorrow's difficulty. It acts in the present and rests in the present. That is why Jesus could say, "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." Not because evil is important, but because tomorrow does not exist for the Christ. At this point, many are tempted to believe they have achieved detachment, but detachment still implies separation. What is happening here is not detachment from life, but intimacy with life, free of fear. Problems lose their voice not because they are ignored, but because they are no longer mistaken for identity. You may still notice thoughts saying, "This could go wrong," or "This might not work." But these thoughts now sound hollow. They no longer feel urgent. They no longer feel convincing. They are seen as movements, not commands. Jesus demonstrated this when he stood before the cross. He did not deny the appearance of suffering, but he did not identify with it. He said, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." He placed identity where no problem could reach it. And this is the great turning point. When problems lose their psychological authority, life ceases to feel like a battlefield. You are no longer defending peace. Peace becomes the ground on which everything stands. Yet, just as freedom begins to reveal itself, there often arises a final resistance, quiet, subtle, and deeply human. It is the fear that if the personal sense dissolves completely, something essential will be lost. Let us move now into this next and delicate unveiling, the fear that appears just before freedom, and why it has no power once it is seen. As the personal sense begins to loosen its final hold, there often arises a fear so quiet and subtle that it may not at first be recognized as fear at all. It does not shout, it does not panic, it whispers, and what it whispers is this: "If I am not here, who will take care of my life?" This fear is not a sign of failure. It is not a step backward. It is the last defense of a sense of self that has believed for a very long time that it was necessary. And because it has been believed necessary, it fears its own disappearance. The mind says, "If I stop managing, things will fall apart. If I do not plan, protect, anticipate, and control, I will be harmed." But this fear has never tested its own assumption. It has only repeated it, and now, as silence grows more familiar than effort, the assumption trembles. Jesus encountered this fear in the wilderness when the voice said, "If thou be the Son of God, if you truly are what you claim to be, prove it, demonstrate it, defend it, secure it." But Jesus did not respond with proof. He did not respond with defense. He responded with truth. "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." In other words, life is not sustained by personal effort. It is sustained by divine being. This fear often appears as concern for responsibility. What about my family, my work, my obligations? But responsibility, when claimed personally, becomes burden. When lived as expression, it becomes grace. The Christ does not abandon responsibility. It fulfills it without strain. The prophet Isaiah heard God say, "I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." Not I will help you uphold yourself. Not I will strengthen your efforts. I will uphold thee. The fear arises only when this promise is not trusted as literal truth. There may also be a fear of losing individuality. If the personal self dissolves, Will I become nothing? Will I disappear? But individuality is not destroyed by the Christ. It is purified. What falls away is not uniqueness, but separation. The wave does not cease to exist when it knows itself as water. It ceases only to fear the ocean. Jesus said, "Whosoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it." This was never a call to self-erasure. It was a revelation that the false sense of life must fall away for the true life to be revealed. What is lost is limitation. What is found is fullness. This fear may appear suddenly, even after long periods of peace. Do not be alarmed by it. Do not analyze it. Do not attempt to overcome it. Simply see it for what it is, the last echo of a belief that no longer has authority. Fear always speaks in the future tense. What if? What will happen? What might occur? The Christ speaks only as now, and in now, fear has no substance. The psalmist wrote, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Not because the valley disappears, but because identity is not placed in the shadow. Fear dissolves when it is seen as a shadow, an appearance without substance. As this final fear is met with understanding, something extraordinary happens. Trust arises without effort. Not trust in outcomes, not trust in circumstances, but trust in being itself. You begin to sense not as belief, but as knowing that life has always been carrying you. And when this knowing stabilizes, the personal sense no longer needs to defend its existence. It gently recedes, like a servant who realizes the master has always been present. Now we are ready to move into the next unfolding, not the disappearance of life, but the emergence of a new way of living, a way not governed by personal effort, but by divine unfolding. Let us continue into this recognition where life is no longer owned, but lived, no longer managed, but expressed. When the final defenses of personal sense begin to soften, something entirely new yet strangely familiar comes into view. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself as a spiritual attainment. It simply feels natural. Life begins to move without the constant sense of mine. And in that absence of ownership, a deeper harmony quietly takes over. Living without ownership does not mean withdrawing from life. It does not mean neglecting duties, abandoning relationships, or refusing action. It means that action is no longer claimed as personal. The sense that I am the one doing this gently dissolves, and in its place arises a quiet awareness that life itself is acting. Jesus lived entirely from this standpoint. That is why he could say, "I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father which hath sent me." This was not submission to an external authority. It was the recognition that there is only one will, one intelligence, one life, expressing itself through all forms. When ownership falls away, you may notice that activity continues, but strain does not. Words are spoken, but they are not rehearsed. Decisions are made, but they are not agonized over. Love flows, but it is not demanded. Forgiveness happens, but it is not forced. The Christ does not try to be loving. Love is its nature. The Apostle Paul touched this mystery when he said, "For me to live is Christ." He did not say, "Christ helps me live." He did not say, "I try to live like Christ." He revealed identity. Life itself, lived through him, was Christ. At this stage, you may notice that you no longer judge experiences so quickly as good or bad. Events are allowed to unfold, without immediate interpretation. The need to label, to resist, to control begins to fade, not because you have disciplined yourself, but because the one who needed to control is no longer in command. Jesus said, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." Righteous judgment is not evaluation, it is clarity. It sees without distortion because it does not see from fear. Living without ownership also means that praise and criticism lose their sting. When praise comes, it is received lightly. When criticism comes, it passes through without lodging. The Christ does not inflate under praise, nor does it diminish under blame. It knows itself apart from both. This is why Jesus could remain silent before accusation. Silence was not strategy, it was identity. There was no personal self to defend. You may begin to notice that even prayer changes form. There is less asking, less explaining, less pleading. Prayer becomes communion rather than request. It becomes a resting in the awareness that the Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him. Needs are not met by petition, but by recognition. As ownership dissolves, trust becomes effortless. Not trust that things will turn out a certain way, but trust in the unfolding itself. You may not always know what comes next, but you no longer feel endangered by not knowing. The future loses its threat because identity is no longer projected into it. The prophet wrote, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord." Ordered does not mean controlled, it means harmonized. Life begins to feel guided, not because guidance is sought, but because resistance has fallen away. This is the beginning of Christed living, not perfection of behavior, but transparency of identity. You still experience human feelings, but they do not define you. You still move through the world, but you are not bound by it. You still act, but action no longer carries the weight of self-concern. And perhaps most quietly of all, you begin to sense joy without reason, peace without cause, love without object. These are not emotions generated by circumstance. They are qualities of being revealed when the false claimant of life steps aside. Jesus said, "My joy I give unto you," not joy caused by success, not joy dependent on conditions. My joy, the joy of being itself. Yet even here, the journey does not end. For as Christed living stabilizes, something further unfolds, a deeper understanding of why this truth was not always spoken openly, and why it emerges only when consciousness is ready. Let us move now into this final unveiling where we see why this teaching waited and why it comes now quietly, without demand, to those who are prepared to hear it. There is often a question that arises quietly in the heart of the sincere seeker, though it is not always spoken aloud. If this truth is so simple, so liberating, so natural, why was it not taught openly? Why was it hidden beneath parables, symbols, doctrines, and centuries of misunderstanding? The answer is not found in history, nor in institutions, nor in deliberate concealment. It is found in consciousness itself. Truth has never been withheld. It has only waited. Jesus spoke plainly when he said, "I have many things to say unto you, but ye cannot bear them now." He did not say this in judgment. He said it in compassion. Revelation is not limited by the one who speaks it. It is limited by the one who hears it. You cannot pour the infinite into a vessel that still believes itself to be small. For most of human history, consciousness lived almost entirely from the personal sense. Identity was bound to tribe, body, survival, authority, and fear. A world that believes itself separate cannot receive the revelation that separation has never existed. A mind that clings to personal power cannot hear that power has never belonged to a person. This is why Jesus spoke in parables, not to confuse, but to protect. Unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, he said, but to others in parables. Parables bypass the intellect. They wait patiently in consciousness until understanding ripens. The Christ teaching, the end of personal sense, the revelation of the I am as the only identity appears dangerous to the personal mind, not because it harms, but because it dissolves illusion. The personal self fears nothing more than its own irrelevance. And so, throughout history, this truth was misunderstood, resisted, softened, or transformed into doctrine. Religion, in its sincerity, did the best it could with the consciousness available. It preserved the story of Jesus when the world could not yet receive the state of consciousness from which he lived. It gave form when essence was too vast to grasp. It gave belief where realization was not yet possible. This was not error. It was necessity. The Apostle Paul wrote, "When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." Humanity has been maturing. Consciousness has been ripening. And what could not be born before begins to reveal itself naturally when fear loosens its grip. For centuries, the personal sense needed a personal God, someone to reward, punish, protect, and judge. An impersonal presence could not be trusted. It could not be bargained with. It could not be controlled. And so the Christ was turned into a person, safely placed in history, safely removed from immediate experience. But something has changed. The world has grown weary of fear-based living, weary of external authority, weary of endless striving and self-improvement, weary of seeking God outwardly while suffering inwardly. And in this weariness, readiness is born. Joel Goldsmith recognized this shift. He saw that many were no longer satisfied with belief. They wanted experience. They wanted reality. They wanted to know not about God, but as God, in the sense that Jesus revealed when he said, "I and the Father are one." This teaching does not appear to the masses all at once. It appears quietly, individually, when the soul is prepared. It is never forced. It is never advertised. It is recognized. You did not find this because you searched correctly. You found it because something in you was ready to remember. Jesus said, "No man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him." This drawing is not physical. It is consciousness calling itself home. And so, if these words resonate, if they feel familiar rather than new, it is because they are not entering you from the outside. They are being recognized from within. The Christ has always been present. Only the readiness to see it has been unfolding. This is why the teaching is simple, yet not easily grasped. It asks nothing of the personal self, and the personal self resists irrelevance. It promises no reward, and the personal self seeks gain. It offers no identity to adopt, and the personal self wants to become something. But to the one who is ready, this teaching is not threatening, it is relief. And now, having seen why this truth waited, we come naturally to the final movement, not a conclusion, not a summary, but a return to the silence from which all truth arises. Let us move gently now into this resting place where words fall away and only being remains. And now we come not to an ending, but to a resting place, not a conclusion of thought, but a return to that which was present before any thought arose. For the purpose of every word spoken has never been to give you something new, but to lead you back to what has always been quietly aware. If you have listened only with the mind, then you have heard ideas. But if you have listened with the heart, with the inner ear, then something deeper has been touched, something that does not argue, does not analyze, does not ask for proof. That something is the Christ, not as a belief, not as a concept, but as the living awareness that is hearing these words now. Jesus never ended his teaching with explanation. He ended it with invitation. Abide in me. He did not say, understand me. He did not say, remember my words. He said, abide. Abiding is not effort. It is remaining where you already are. And so we are not carrying anything forward from this moment. We are not taking a teaching into the future. We are simply noticing what is present now when the need to become, to fix, to understand has gently fallen away. The personal sense may ask, what should I do with this? But the Christ does not ask that question. The Christ rests, and in resting, it lives. The prophet Elijah did not find God in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the still, small voice. That voice is not sound, it is presence. It is the quiet certainty of being that requires no words to affirm it. Let the words now recede. Let them dissolve into the silence from which they came. Nothing has been added to you. Nothing has been taken away. Only a false weight has been loosened, perhaps only slightly, perhaps just enough to breathe more freely. You are not a seeker of God. You never were. You are an expression of God, appearing as form, moving as life, aware as consciousness. The I that says I am is not personal. It is the same I that spoke from the burning bush, the same I that spoke through Jesus, the same I that has always lived as you. There is nothing you must remember from this moment. There is nothing you must practice. The Christ does not require maintenance. It reveals itself whenever attention rests rather than strives. And if tomorrow you forget, nothing is lost. If you struggle again, nothing is undone. Truth is not fragile. It does not come and go. It waits patiently, eternally present, ready to be recognized the moment effort gives way to stillness. The psalmist said, in quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Not in effort, not in understanding, in quietness. So let us rest here, not trying to hold this state, not trying to preserve this peace, but simply allowing life to be what it already is. The Christ lives you. It always has. And when you rise from this moment, you do not leave this awareness behind. You carry nothing with you because nothing was given. You simply move as life moving, speak as life speaking, act as life acting. This is not the end of a journey. It is the end of unnecessary striving. And from here, life unfolds not from effort, but from grace.